Imagine journeying to a territory where survival hangs by a thread, where each day is a battle against the elements, against scarcity, against the very reality of your existence. This was the plight of the settlers who landed in Jamestown in May 1607. No women for companionship or procreation, just men and boys with the burden of establishing a presence on behalf of their nation. Imagine their relief when women finally arrived 9 months later, only to face a life of servitude and abuse. And yet, amidst the hardship, the seeds of democracy were being sown with the establishment of the House of Burgesses. However, the key to the colony's survival lay not in soil tillage or democracy, but in a controversial golden leaf. And the curious part about this leaf is, well, let's keep the suspense a bit longer. What's up, my amazing and curious folks? Ready to unravel mysteries together? I'm your guide, Caesar, and joining me in this journey is the insightful commentator, Sonia.
Hey there, everyone. Excited to dive into today's topic with you all.
On this podcast, we'll be sharing daily episodes about some mind-boggling curiosities. Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss any of our episodes. Let's dive in. So, let's jump back to May 1607. Picture this: just over 100 Englishmen land on the swampy shores of what we now know as Virginia. They're here under orders from King James to establish an English colony. And in honor of their king, they named their new home Jamestown, marking the establishment of the first European colony in the New World. But don't let that romantic image fool you. Life was far from easy for these pioneers.
The harsh realities they faced must have been daunting indeed.
Absolutely. Death, disease, harsh weather, strained relations with the natives, delayed support from England — all these hardships were part of their daily life. And among the settlers, there were no women. Imagine that: 100 men and boys starting a new life without any female companionship, partnership, or love.
It paints a grim picture, doesn't it?
It really does. But it's essential to remember, these settlers were more focused on survival than anything else. They had to establish a presence on behalf of their nation. They were a diverse group, ranging from adventurers to craftsmen and laborers. But the harsh conditions meant that they needed settlers who were physically strong and capable, eliminating half of the population from the equation: the women. So, after months of hard labor and solitude, they started missing the company of women. And after 9 long months, ships arrived from England, bringing with them the first group of women to settle in the New World.
I can only imagine their relief, and yet, the challenges these women must have faced.
Indeed. Across the Atlantic, England was abuzz with horror stories from Jamestown. It was a deterrent for many women, while some settlers were even considering leaving Jamestown to find brides back home.
It sounds like King James' plan was on rocky grounds.
It was, until Edwin Sandys, the treasurer of the Virginia Company, stepped in. He persuaded the board members to attract English women to immigrate to Jamestown to marry the settlers and ensure the future of the colony.
So, essentially, they started advertising for mail-order brides?
That's right. They even sweetened the deal with free transportation across the Atlantic, a plot of land in Jamestown, a dowry for home necessities and clothes, and the freedom to choose their husbands. Remarkably, this plan worked, and soon Jamestown was populated with both men and women.
The hardships these women must have endured, it's quite a tale.
Yes, it is. Those who did make the journey had to be incredibly tough to survive in the brutal conditions of the New World. Between 1620 and 1622, more than 100 women arrived in Virginia. Some were purchased by single men as wives, others were indentured servants, and still more were put to work in the tobacco fields. These women faced physical, emotional, and sexual abuse while being subjected to grueling work conditions. Even with the arrival of women, life in Jamestown remained male-dominated.
You know, this reminds me of a story from my childhood. I remember, when I was about 8 or 9, overhearing my grandmother tell stories about our ancestors, who were also pioneers in their own right. They weren't in Jamestown, but they were some of the first settlers in Pernambuco, my home state in Brazil. The stories she told, they weren't that different from what we're discussing now. Hardships, perseverance, survival, these themes echoed through our family history.
That sounds like a harsh reality, indeed.
Yes, it was. Like in Jamestown, women had to work long hours to pay off their debts, handling both field work and domestic duties. And as the years passed, any progress women might have made was pushed back by a male-dominated society.
It's disheartening to hear how women were treated.
It truly is. And not long after the first wave of women, the first ship full of captured Africans arrived in Jamestown in 1619, marking the beginning of slavery in the colony. These enslaved Africans were brought in to help with the strenuous manual labor required to establish the colony.
So, the hardships of frontier life were overlaid with the atrocity of slavery.
Yes, and it's a history we shouldn't forget, as it shaped the world we live in today.
So, the Portuguese had initially captured these Africans and were transporting them to Mexico. But 2 English privateer ships intercepted their journey.
They attacked the Portuguese ship, stealing several dozen Africans?
Exactly. The White Lion, one of the English ships, then redirected to Jamestown. Here, they made a deal, and this marked the beginning of slavery in the colony.
So the colony's culture was shaped both by the struggles of the pioneers and the atrocity of slavery.
Yes, and the climate proved to be another challenge. The settlers had expected a climate similar to what they were used to back home. But they were faced with hot, humid summers and ice-cold winters.
They had no idea what they were walking into, did they?
Not at all. And to make matters worse, they didn't realize they were in the midst of what we now know as the Little Ice Age, which lasted from around 1550 to nearly 1800.
And wasn't there also a problem with droughts?
There was. From 1606 to 1612, Virginia experienced one of its driest summer periods ever. So, the settlers had to face harsh winters, wet springs, drought-filled summers, and then the cycle would start all over again.
So it was really one calamity after another for these early settlers.
Absolutely. But it's these trials and tribulations that have shaped the history of Jamestown and, by extension, the history of America. Each summer was more brutal than the last, with crops and livestock withering in the heat. Yet, the settlers persisted, despite getting no breaks from Mother Nature.
That's incredible. It's a testament to the human spirit, isn't it? It's fascinating to think about how much people can endure when they're striving for a better life. On a related note, historians have noted similar issues in other early colonies too, where the harsh conditions and lack of resources forced settlers to become amazingly resourceful and resilient.
Indeed. Now, while the climate was a major challenge, the lack of drinking water presented an even bigger problem. Jamestown settlers had to extract drinking water from their swamp-like surroundings. This led to many settlers dying from diseases, often caused or exacerbated by contaminated drinking water.
That's horrible. Clean water is such a basic necessity, one we often take for granted today.
Absolutely. And to make matters worse, famine was also a major problem. Despite working hundreds of hours, the settlers often had little food to show for it. Just 6 months after the initial colonists landed, nearly 500 new settlers arrived.
So, more mouths to feed with the same limited resources. That must have worsened their situation.
Yes, it did. But, against all odds, the settlers of Jamestown continued to persevere, providing us with a fascinating glimpse into the struggles of the early American settlers. Over the next year, the settlers tried to make the most of their circumstances. Under the leadership of Captain John Smith, they managed to negotiate a treaty with the Powhatan tribe. However, after Smith was injured and had to return to England, the Powhatans laid siege to Jamestown.
They were then walled off inside the fort with no access to their gardens and farms, right?
That's right. And it didn't take long for them to start eating whatever they could find in order to survive. Forensic evidence suggests that during the winter of 1609 to 1610, they resorted to eating dogs, rats, horses, and snakes. They even consumed leather shoes for a few calories.
That's horrifying. They were truly desperate.
Absolutely. Things got so desperate they even resorted to cannibalism. This period has come to be known as the starving time.
Wow. It's difficult to imagine the lengths they had to go to just to survive.
Indeed. Despite the severe conditions, the colonists were determined to succeed. They had to keep going, not just for themselves, but for King James and England's elite, who had high hopes for the colony. Failure was simply not an option. This determination, as grim as the circumstances were, is an essential part of Jamestown's story. The colonists were not just struggling, they were also clever. They hid the full extent of their situation, fearing that revealing the actual number of deaths would leave them open to an ambush. They buried the dead in unmarked graves, even pairing off corpses to make it seem like their numbers were halving.
That's unbelievably tragic, but also shows a deep instinct for survival. It's strange, but this reminds me of a news article I saw recently about a group of modern-day explorers who, even with all our technology and luxury, still had to resort to similar tactics to hide their numbers from potential threats during an expedition.
Interestingly, it's not all grim. Jamestown also marks the beginning of American democracy. It housed the House of Burgesses, the first democratically elected group in the New World. Although voting rights were limited, the fact that all Englishmen who settled were able to vote was a major turning point.
That's fascinating. It's like they were laying the foundations of modern democracy, even while they were battling for survival. And just the other day, I was at a local town hall meeting, and I couldn't help but think of the roots of this practice. How, even in the early days of colonization, people were finding ways to voice their opinions and have a say in their leadership. Quite remarkable, isn't it?
While the culture they'd come from was ruled by a monarchy, the colony did see some freedoms. This was particularly evident when it came to tobacco.
Oh, tobacco. A game changer, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The survival of the colony might have hinged on developing tobacco as a cash crop. King James I was against tobacco. He found it loathsome to the eye and hateful to the nose, but the colonists were far enough away from their king to make their own choices. And, quite frankly, they needed the money.
So, they started growing tobacco in Jamestown?
Yes, they did. Prior to this, Jamestown residents had tried a lot of things to create a profitable New World venture, from forestry and logging to glassmaking and silk making. But John Rolfe changed everything when he returned to Jamestown with South American tobacco seeds.
So, it was a bit of smuggling that saved the day?
It seems so. We aren't really sure where Rolfe got the seeds, but it's thought he might have smuggled them from the Caribbean. Despite it being a considerable risk, Rolfe and his companions started experimenting with growing the seeds, and through many trials and errors, they finally found success.
And even King James came around on tobacco, right?
Exactly. He saw the potential profits and granted Jamestown a monopoly on the crop. From there, the colony's fortunes started to turn around. What a journey it has been exploring the harsh realities of life in the Jamestown colony. From the arrival of the first settlers, the struggles they faced, the toll it took on their health and mortality rate, to the birth of democracy and their ultimate survival, thanks to tobacco.
It's really been a roller coaster, hasn't it? It's amazing to see how much history is packed in the story of one settlement, one that has had such an impact on the world we live in today.
Truly, the mystery of survival in Jamestown was revealed through determination, innovation, and a touch of rebellion. It just goes to show, where there's smoke, there's fire, or in their case, tobacco.
Haha, well said. And folks, if you enjoyed this deep dive into history as much as we did, please blast that like button. Don't forget to drop your thoughts in the comments below and share this episode with your friends.
It's been an absolute pleasure bringing this story to you. Stay curious, keep exploring, and we'll catch you in the next episode of Curiosity Wonderland.
Goodbye and stay safe.
The information we discussed today is from the article 10 Tough Truths About Life in the Jamestown Colony by Selmy Angulo on Listverse, published on October 8, 2023. The full URL is in the video description if you want to delve deeper into the subject. That's all for now. Take care.